Good morning. Today is the third Sunday of Lent. Our first reading is from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 8 and verses 13 to 15. Our psalm is Psalm 103. Our second reading is from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 to 6 and verses 10 to 12, and our gospel is from the Gospel of Luke chapter 13, verses 1 to 9. Moses, Moses, Moses. In our first reading today, Moses is caught in a situation that many of us have been caught in. He is caught having a conversation with somebody and you don't know their name. Now they know your name. They're using your name over and over. Moses, Moses, God keeps calling him. And you're supposed to know their name too, but you don't. Now Moses, he thought of a way out of it. And I'm going to have to remember this. This is a good one. He says to God, "Now when they ask me who sent me, what do you want I should say to them? What do you go by? What for them to call you?" It's pretty smart for a fig tree, because you know that Moses is a fig tree from the parable Jesus was telling in the gospel. Up to this point at the burning bush, Moses has been leading a pretty crazy and wild life. Moses, the Israelite baby who was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. At the time, Pharaoh was killing all the male Israelite boys. And so Moses' mother hid him in a wicker basket, put him down by the river, left his sister Miriam to keep an eye on things. And Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the river and finds the baby. She has pity on this poor little Israelite boy, and she decides to take him home. Now, Miriam pops up out of the reeds, and says, "Hey, funny story, but I know a lady that would be perfect to raise this baby for you." So Moses ends up living in the palace with Pharaoh and Pharaoh's daughter, and his mother's there as the nanny. But he knew he was an Israelite. He realized, where he came from, his heritage and everything. And so one day as he saw an Egyptian hitting one of the Hebrews, Moses came up and killed the Egyptian. He came up, murdered him, and hid the body. And then he walked right on back down to the palace like nobody's business. He played it cool until he found out that there were witnesses. Then he freaked out. He fled Egypt, went down to Midian to hide out. Now in Midian, they didn't know he was an Israelite. They thought he was just another Egyptian. He let them think it. So he's hiding out down there. That's when he comes across this burning bush. Now, to all of us up to this point, he just doesn't seem like the type of fig tree that's producing good fruit. He hadn't produced any so far. He's lived a duplicitous life. He's killed a guy, hid the body, ran away. He's lambing it down here at Jethro's house. I don't know if any of us would say that this is the guy who's going to lead Israel out of bondage in Egypt. I don't know if any of us would say, looking at his life to that point, that this is the guy that God is going to use to work miraculous signs and wonders. I don't think we would say this is the guy who's going to go down as one of the greatest prophets and holy people that have ever lived. Any of us, if he was a fig tree in our garden, we would have pruned him right out of there. A murderer, lambing it over at Jethro's house. But that's because we humans can't really see the bigger picture. We can't even see or understand God's plan for our own lives, let alone someone else's life. We can't see what a fig tree might become if Jesus, the gardener, is allowed to cultivate the ground around it with love, to fertilize it with truth and the Holy Spirit. Instead, when we look around at our fig trees, all we see is a drug addict. A homeless drug addict who panhandles and steals and works the system. If they have kids, they neglect them, costing taxpayer money. They're a drag on society. They aren't producing any good fruit. And now they want us to carry Narcan in case we see one of these drug addicts overdosing. We can save their life. We can save that fig tree. But it doesn't produce any fruit. So why would we want to? When we look around at our fig trees, all we see is an immigrant. An immigrant who's going to sneak in here, work for cash, not pay taxes on it. He's going to send all the money back to whatever third world country he came from. You know what kind of whole country. I'm supposed to care about him and his family? Quit letting them in here. They don't produce any fruit for us. Not in our garden. When we look around our garden at our fig trees, we only see a divorced person. Somebody whose first marriage didn't work out. Now they're divorced and remarried, civilly remarried, because you can't have another sacramental marriage without an annulment. And we know that they're not going to produce any good fruit because we're going to hold them at arm's length. We're going to withhold the Eucharist because the civil status of a marriage doesn't matter. They might be able to file a joint tax return and easily inherit each other's property when they die and have a family insurance plan, but that civil marriage, that's not the one that counts. The one that matters is the sacramental marriage. That's what we care about. In any case, we know that they aren't going to produce any good fruit because they're living outside the parameters of how a good fig tree ought to live. That civil marriage is not the one that matters. Unless it's a gay civil marriage. Well, then it matters a great deal. Then we care an awful lot about the civil marriage. If we find out that an employee is in one of these gay civil marriages, well, we might fire the employee. And if we find out that a kid's parents are in one of these gay civil marriages, we might not let the kid come to our Catholic school. We might refuse the kid's baptism, and if, God forbid, one of the spouses should die, we're likely to refuse the Catholic funeral. Because now it matters that they can file a joint tax return and that they have a family insurance plan, that they can inherit each other's property. That they can even visit each other in the hospital during family visiting hours. Now we know somehow that this will interfere with our garden some kind of way. So we want to make sure that they don't produce any fruit of any kind. So much so that this weekend all across the country, we're holding traditional marriage rosary rallies. White folks love a rally. We're having these rallies to pray for an end to these civil marriages. These civil marriages that we only sometimes care about. These marriages that don't produce any of our kind of fruit. All these fig trees not producing our kind of fruit. What does the gospel say about that today? Cut it down. Why should it exhaust the soil? And the gardener says in reply, leave it for one more year. I'll cultivate the ground around it. I'll fertilize it. It may bear fruit in the future. If only we had a gardener.